Okay. And for you?
I had the best bread in the world, which is Hovis's Seed Sensations for toast, and I'm not finished yet.
What the hell kind of interview is this?
Rude. And I had it with peanut butter, which is smooth, and a glass of apple juice. Rude. Got the wraps off.
Okay, well, we have had some, computer glitchy type stuff, but we are actually here and we're using a new, recorder and that's not interesting. Fucking boring. How about we just go cheers? Yay! Happy New Year, guys. How you doing? This is beautiful. I'm going to take the keyboard off this thing so everything may stop working. It's fine. Everything's fine. Okay. It is kind of peaking still quite a lot, which I don't fully understand. So I'm just going to set this guy back a little bit and see if that makes any difference. I have...
Jonty's got a new microphone.
I have a new microphone. I'm terribly excited. My wife bought it for me and I've been playing with it today and it's super fun. Not good chat, it has to be. Hey, it's 2020. The first Beer Christianity of 2020. I'm kind of excited. I'm kind of blown away that it is in fact 2020. What has the year already been for you guys? Like, sum it up in 3 words.
Oh, raging tonsillitis.
That's 2 words.
I would say the third, but it's stuck in my throat.
His throat's too sore. Yeah. Weird to me that people have tonsils in this country. Just weird. Like, it's kind of odd. Yours?
Busy. Anticipation.
All right. Busy anticipation.
Again you guys do not really understand the number 3.
You tell us your 3 words.
I am thinking of third.
Sorry, we cut her off.
Okay, we cut her off. We wouldn't want to cut her off. That'd be terrible. My 3 words would be horrific, but improving. Nice. Yeah. I thought that we could start off with a kind of thing about New Year's resolutions. I'm sure, and this is a safe bet for most things, I'm sure there are some Christians out there who don't approve of New Year's resolutions.
Yes. They're not listening to this podcast.
That is fair. That is fair to say. Is there any reason not to approve of New Year's resolutions?
I mean, I feel like you can not care about New Year's resolutions without disapproving of them. Like, I don't really care, but I understand if for other people, like, the turn of the new year is actually a really helpful thing for them to be like, yeah, no, I am going to make some change and actually stick to it. So, like, I understand that it's helpful for other people. It's just, it just never really sticks for me. So I feel like I save myself the disappointment and not partake.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. I actually heard somebody say something kind of like that, but the actual opposite. No, somebody was saying that, like, it's so unhelpful to think of it in these breaks because, was I watching this on TV or something? I don't know. But, like, this artificial break at the beginning of the year, like everything stopped.
Artificial. The seasons are artificial.
Yes, the seasons are artificial. Yes, the seasons are artificial. Like, what is autumn? Autumn is between summer and the other one, winter. This is the in-between bit. It's a spectrum. And, in 2020, should we really be so double binary? I don't think so. Okay. I think it's wrong. No, but this person was saying, like, it's not actually that helpful to think of it in those terms because you think of everything in the last year as ending, and actually you're still in the same shit that you were last year. You're still dealing with all the stuff that's come past there, and this expectation that now you have to be new is really quite unreasonable. But I get what you're saying. It is actually quite helpful to have an excuse to just try and renew things.
So my good friend and mentor about 10 years ago said to me that rather than New Year's resolutions, why don't you try faith goals? And this was his thing. You do faith goals. So just have 5 faith goals for the coming year, and this is stuff that you're both going to work on, but you're also going to pray into a lot. So it's partly your effort, but it's partly God's effort, and you're kind of in it together. And it's not like a negative thing, like, or it could be, but it's not necessarily often New Year's resolutions like, oh, I'm going to do less or drink less or whatever else. Whereas this is more like it could be something that's totally outside of your control, that you're just going to commit to praying for this for the year, or it could be something that actually is within your control or part within your control, and you pray through and work on. That has been the most helpful thing for me, and I do it every year, and it's awesome.
Nice. Do you want to share with the listeners one or two of your faith goals?
Yeah, well, the raging tonsillitis wiped out my kind of thinking as far as so I've not properly set them for this year, but if on the top of my head I got a couple to roll over from last year, because despite my mustard seed faith, they did not come to pass. And so there's some stuff around I just really want my brother to be thriving in life and to love the Lord, and so I'm just going to keep kind of praying for that in the coming year. I'm really keen that my family is a blessing to those around us. That's a big one for me. Is like I feel like we're in a very fortunate position in so many ways, and I want that blessing, that fortune to pour over into the lives of people around us, and so that's something I'm praying into. There's a lot of stuff going on at work this year, and I think my prayer for this year, although it's not fully formed, or my faith goal for this year at work, is that I would honour God and use the skills that He's given to me the best I can for His kingdom, or something, or just find kind of my place in
Nice.
work and that. So there's just a few examples. Yeah.
Nice. What about you, Lola?
I would say, what, as in like faith goals or resolutions or
Faith resolution goals.
faith resolution goals? Same ones. I think I would like to have a more reflexive faith. So in that, like, my instant reflex is to like pray about something, and like, yeah, that would be great. So I feel like that's what I want to be like aiming for. I would like to read my Bible more. I don't read my Bible enough. I think that would be also a good thing to do. Mine are lower goals than Drabs' goals. Like, you know.
They're all good goals.
That's a good thing about resolutions and goals.
Yeah.
They're like individual to each person.
Yeah. Absolutely. Mine will be there's some stuff I need to let go of from last year that has just been making me super sad, and I think just kind of like learning to let go of things generally, and just and I've got a big one of just wanting to become more like psychologically healthy. So I started towards the end of last year going to counselling, and which I've never really done before, except for like, you know, like CBT, which hardly counts, guys. That's what I say. It's barely psychology. And so this is more like, you know, talking about, you know, like your past and you know who you are and stuff. So to kind of get healthier, so that I am spending less time and energy on things that don't matter and more on being useful, and ideally hurting fewer people around me. I think that's kind of my main goal for that, is if I can hurt fewer people around me by being me, that'd be kind of the dream.
Yeah,
I think that's So those are my resolutions, and if you want to share any resolutions as a listener to Beer Christianity, then do get in touch at beerchristianity@yahoo.com, or you can get in touch on Twitter at beerxianity. That's X in the place of Christ, in case you're wondering what it is. It's a beer EXIA, I don't know. And you can also find us on all of our various channels, and get in touch via comments and that sort of stuff. So Instagram. We're on Instagram now. We are.
Amazing.
I know, right?
Good work, Laura.
Yeah. I mean, it's not Laura, but screw you. 100% me.
But you didn't remember it, did you?
I didn't remember it. That is true. Also, hey, so get in touch with us and tell us your New Year's resolutions and or faith goals, or if you have any issues with New Year's resolutions or faith goals. We should also talk about what we're drinking.
Oh, yes.
Oh, and where we are.
Good, we're in Barrow Lounge in Didcot, the fine establishment. We came here for the Goose IPA at my request. They are not serving Goose IPA tonight.
They are not.
So I'm drinking some kind of punk IPA. Literally.
Young punk IPA. Yes, and that's by Brewdog, obviously. And Laura is drinking her traditional...
Yep, on the Jack and Coke.
On the Jack and Coke, as always. And yeah, we're in Barrow Lounge in Didcot. Somebody did say to me on Twitter, So I believe it was Raquelita who said that, so you're in one of the 2 pubs in Didcot. There are more than 2 pubs in Didcot. We don't go to them.
These are the only ones in walking distance.
That's actually true. Because we could go to the Prince of Wales at some point at least, or we could try out. Do you remember the Sprat? The Sprat. That was hardcore. Oh, you weren't here.
Yeah, no, they shut that down and replaced it with houses.
Yes, they did.
As they did with the Crown.
Yes, they did. Yeah. So anyway, but there are still plenty of pubs in Didcot.
Good memories, guys.
Good memories. Just really beautiful.
Not good memories.
Beautiful times. So we're drinking that, and welcome to Beer Christianity.
Welcome.
How are we 10 minutes in and we said nothing?
This is classic Beer Christianity.
Okay.
If they're still listening now, they expect it.
They do. That's true. All right, so I'm going to open up this document and see if there's a thing. So, we got an email. Actually, cheers for the email. That's how you know you're starting 2020 right, okay?
Yep.
And the email is from Robert Hiernink, I think, because he's in the Netherlands. And he sent us an email saying, hey, I just hope that... Well, what did he say? He said some nice things, actually. He said...
His actual words were, I love your podcast.
I love your podcast and the way you speak about the different topics. And you particularly like the Halloween episodes. And I just think that's very cool. So he had some questions for us, and Robert
He had some brilliant questions.
They were really, really cool, and the guys are super excited when I sent them through to them. And they include how do you see the future of Christianity in Europe? And have you heard of the callback where 1,000 Christians will try to win Europe back for Christ? So let's start with that. We've got some other ones, and the other ones I think we'll go into more detail. The future of Christianity in Europe, I would say, is probably going to be largely immigrant communities and their churches growing, unless there is a massive move of the Spirit. I think in Europe the church will generally end up taking over social functions as austerity bites in more and more countries, either in countries like the UK, where we've chosen to leave the EU so that we can screw the poor, or in mainland Europe, where on behalf of the banks and the behest of the EU, they will be screwing the poor. So either way, fantastic. And the church will be doing more church and food banks, and I think our witness will improve, and I think you will find more and more people probably coming to church and coming to Christ, but belonging in different ways, belonging first and believing later, I think would be a kind of standard thing that will start happening across. It'll feel like a weird kind of, New Age movement that you're now getting involved in. People's families will think they've joined a cult, that kind of stuff, if they do convert. And and you're going to have huge immigrant churches making very, very slow progress in getting the indigenous locals to get involved, kind of like how mission has always worked.
Yeah. Maybe some believing first and never really belonging as well.
That is also true.
Technology probably enables the gospel to transfer in a few different ways, and maybe some virtual communities and stuff which don't actually work for people in the way they hope they would.
Yeah.
And it kind of fizzles out and is just a really tough grind.
Yeah. Actually, we may have people listening to this podcast in that exact position.
Exactly.
Are you listening to Beer Christianity instead of going to church? Because you've made the right decision. No. Not saying you made the right decision, but just saying hello and welcome, and we hope that we can help you in your walk, because hey, different seasons, different, all that sort of stuff. So I don't know, man. I don't know a lot about mission in Europe. I edited a magazine called Mission Catalyst that had a whole bunch of stuff on Europe. Look up, Google Mission Catalyst and ask for a copy, man. We will send it to you. You'll love it. The other one was the callback.
So
I don't know anything about this, Laura, but you looked it up.
I looked it up. I also didn't know anything about this, but I thought I would look it up and see what it was. It's basically this big festival that they're doing in Amsterdam in the summer. That thousands of people are supposed to come to, and it's going to be 4 days of kind of worship and stuff like that, like a big festival. And then afterwards, they're going to go. I'm going to find the screenshots that I took off their website. They're going to do this missions week where they'll kind of split into groups and go to 20 cities across Europe and kind of do outreach things and outreach nights, and just kind of exploring, I think taking what they've felt and experienced in the big festival, and then doing it in like other places, which is like very cool. And I liked their tickets a lot, because they have like a cheap ticket, like a standard ticket that you can do, but then you can also get some higher, like more expensive tickets, and they'll pay for like the venue hire, and they'll also pay for seats for it says for one of the tickets, it says this ticket will give you this is a very boring thing that I'm going to read. You should cut this out.
please carry on.
The first half of this is boring, the second half is cool, but this ticket is you'll pay for the event and help pay for the hire of the stadium. In real terms, you're helping pay for a seat for someone's unsafe family member to sit in, which is very cool.
That's very nice.
It's very cool.
I like that.
And who doesn't love a festival?
Yeah,
Nice.
So
absolutely.
good luck to him.
Go. That's excellent. And this is winning Europe back. The only thing I had a question about
a
was
little bit dumb.
it was what, people of European origin?
Yeah, so I think it's the idea is you get people, it's like Europeans and like people I think who are like across the world who come
But
with it.
white.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the indigenous European thing.
So, you know, maybe, but you know. Like,
Wow. This reminds me of watching Jojo Rabbit last night with, I was there with Laura and with my wife, and just, I have never been more aware of having a slightly alt-right haircut than watching the little boy talk to his imaginary friend Adolf Hitler. I was just like, I really hope people understand why I'm here, and not as a, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, those are your first two questions, Robert, and I don't know if we answered them particularly well.
you did ask whether we thought the callback would work.
No. No, I don't think so.
It won't win Europe for Christ, if that's what you're asking.
But it may give people a much better impression of Christians if the way that it's done is sensitive and loving. And I always find that if your outreach is not just trying to get people to join our club, but your outreach is actually helping them and showing them love in some way, either practically or emotionally, you're probably more likely to do some great groundwork.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would have
think
thought.
it depends on how you're defining will it work. Like if you're saying we're going to convert the entirety of Europe back to Christ, it's unlikely that that's going to happen. But like, you probably, you know, if one person converts off the back of that, that's a win.
There's
So,
rejoicing
you know.
in heaven.
Hey,
Fantastic.
narrow is the gate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, you know.
absolutely. Okay, this is a really cool question.
So cool, we're zooming in on it.
How do you see the future of Christianity in Europe evolving? Well, I don't really know how that's going, but then I see a lot of evangelical groups who are becoming fanatical in believing the scripture and living in the end days. It's almost like there are only two ways of looking at Christians and Christianity. You're either a fanatic evangelical, conservatively reformed, which Robert says terrifies him because he can't get himself to be that ignorant. I was like, taking a hard stand there, Robert, I'm not gonna lie. Or you just lose all belief and see Jesus as just an example of how to live, either Gandhi or Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
Is there a middle way? And if so, how does that one look? And I think that is a brilliant question, because I think, honestly, we're struggling with that all the time.
Yeah, it's probably the reason we did this podcast.
It actually is.
Yeah.
You've got to the heart of why we're doing this, because, like, I don't want to let go of either of those things, and I don't want to just default to either of those things. If that makes sense.
Because we're actually all pretty fiercely evangelical, actually.
Yeah.
Whilst at the same time accused a lot of the time of being liberals.
I think, and that's actually the cool thing. When I go to Greenbelt, which I love and feel like is my spiritual home, I'm always reminded that I'm not a liberal. You know, and when I, you know, spend some time in the comments section on Premier Christian Radio or Christianity Magazine, there on their Facebook page, I'm like, yeah, I'm not a conservative, though it has to be said. And I think you're so right. Like, there is, and I think we should address some of the stuff in there maybe, but like, for me, I like holding both of those things together or avoiding both of them. It's not so much about going to the middle way for me as trying to hold things together. So I want to be an evangelical who is not ashamed of the parts of it that are perhaps not that palatable, but not insane. and I want to be a liberal who does the same, to be honest. I want to be holding that stuff together. I want to be focusing on a Christianity that makes the world better rather than just more full of Christians. But I also don't want to let go of the fact that I believe that when somebody comes to faith, even if they don't make the world a better place, that's still something to celebrate, because that's a person who's coming to a relationship with Jesus Christ, and that's in itself good.
Absolutely.
What do you guys think of the, particularly the stuff about scripture and about being new reformed and these kind of like hardcore, quite intense right-wingers? Like it's easy to just write them off, but what should our attitude be to that and to them?
One of the most helpful things I ever heard of this, and this relates a little bit to your final question as well, Robert, about how to work with and relate to people of that disposition. Probably the most helpful thing I ever heard on this, and probably shaped my faith more than anything other, was a talk I heard by Brian McLaren. Now, admittedly,
that classic
middle way.
He's not a liberal or a conservative, is he?
Okay. But Brian McLaren is at his best when he's talking in a more pastoral sense rather than a theological sense.
What are we drinking? I'm sorry. I'm just interrupting. I just finished mine, and I got. What are we? Oh,
okay. You
got me a Moretti.
Oh,
okay.
Sorry, was that not good enough beer for you?
No. That's fine. I was just like, am I just sorry? And I'm just interrupting like a dick.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, Brian McLaren.
He does a talk which you probably find on YouTube about the kind of 4 phases of the spiritual journey, and it's not an absolute thing, but I found it a really helpful framework where he talks about kind of stage 1 as being the very, very black and white, kind of Richard Raw first half of life stuff, and it naturally lends you towards a very fundamentalist disposition, such as that which you're describing. Stage 2 being a sort of an activist stage where everything's about doing and working hard, and rather than the acquisition of knowledge in the first stage, but the second stage more about working really hard in evangelism and whatever else. And then the third stage, when it all gets chucked up in the air, which I guess is more Richard Raw's second half of life, and is just when you're in utter despair and confusion, and you're angry at the stage 1 people. You're really, really angry. You're a little bit angry at stage 2, but mostly you hate the stage 1ers. And then stage 4, supposedly you reach a kind of place of harmony before you go all the way back around to the beginning. I say all that because that for me was a super useful framework, particularly when I found myself in stage 3, super hating on the stage 1ers. And even though I myself was there at one time as well, and I just didn't really know how to relate to these people, I got so frustrated with it, and actually just to know that was a phase, and it was okay to be there, and it also helped me to think about, okay, so what does it mean for me to relate in a pastoral way, or just to be helpful for the discipleship of the other people in stage 1 and stage 2, and not because I'm better than them or because I'm further on than them, because I'm going to go back around as well, frankly, but actually, I found that a really useful framework, and if that sounds at all like it might be useful, then look that up on YouTube or whatever, because that is some good stuff.
Yeah, and I would recommend, for me, I never got into the McLaren stuff, but I got into the Richard Raw stuff. So Richard Raw, the Franciscan Catholic, he talks about the first and second half of life. I mean, we're talking to a theology student here, so maybe talking super, super low.
We're talking to all our dear listeners.
To all of our flock. Hello, flock. Flock, you guys. Just want to flock this. Anyway, Richard, this is edifying content, is what this is. This is why we haven't actually been invited on any other Christian podcasts. I joined the Christian podcast community. Ours is not similar to the other ones on there.
Really? It's shocking.
That is shocking. Just putting it out there. And I feel like we're also probably significantly too conservative for Nomad and all the cool Christians. So,
yeah. And what's the other one?
The Liturgists.
Yeah.
They're really cool. There's also the Magnificast, which is full on. I mean, it's an incredible name, and they are full on Christian communists in the States, and like good people. But when I started trying to listen to it, they were doing this series on evangelicalism, and they're just hating on evangelicalism in a really big way, and I'm just like,
and that is the wrong response.
I know,
Because it's all about taking everything that you learn in that first half or that stage 1 and building on it into stage 2, not rejecting on it when you get to the next stage, right?
So the way that Raw talks about it is he says in stage 1 you're building the container. You're deciding who's in and who's out. You're deciding what's right and what's wrong. It's black and white lines. It's absolutism. It is about setting boundaries. And then in stage 2 you just find yourself not caring about the boundaries anymore. And you start caring about if you're building a cup. Or do you build a cup if you were forming a cup? If you were blowing a no. If you were, it's glass blowing.
Oh yeah.
Glass blowing. So I'm saying.
And they do that in the Netherlands, right?
They do glass blowing in the Netherlands.
It's all made out of glass.
A cup of
glass. Glasses.
If you were 3D printing a cup, all right, then that's fine. But then afterwards, that's the first half of life. The second half of life is actually putting whatever's in it, and you're far more concerned about what's in it. So the boundaries are there, but you don't really care that much about what they are, and that's not what you're fighting for anymore. You're fighting more for, if you're fighting at all, for what's in the cup. And what he said that was really helpful was if you start in the second half of life, because it's not really chronological, it's just the phase that you go through. If you start there, you are a hippie. You are what Robert's talking about of just like, well, I guess Jesus was just quite a nice guy or whatever. It doesn't actually mean anything. You can lose any kind of impetus to do anything with it.
Yeah, because there's no framework. Eh?
Exactly. But if you never get out of the first half, you become rigid. You become the kind of person who is annoyed that people are breaking rules, that they were separating out of it, and you become one of those Christians who is more focused on the stuff that doesn't matter than matters. And we don't want this podcast, by the way, ever to be the kind of podcast that goes, well, we're Christians, but we're not like those Christians, because fuck those Christians.
Yeah, because we have no interest in evangelical bashing.
No.
Unless it's about evangelical attitudes towards Halloween, then we'll bash those a little bit. But and the young Calvinists, they deserve it.
Obviously screw the young Calvinists. I mean, like, I feel like that goes without saying. Somebody just rang a bell. The bar agrees.
Yes.
No, if you're a young Calvinist listening to things, and actually I know, some of my best friends are Calvinists. They've got great rhythm. They're good at sports. They're not good at sports. Young Calvinists can't play sports unless they're those really bro Calvinists. I imagine they can.
Oh, they can as well.
Yeah,
but it's like ultimate frisbee and stuff.
Hey, don't diss ultimate frisbee. Also, that is a liberal sport. If anybody's in it, that is a liberal. My wife had a friend who played ultimate frisbee, and they used to go to these big gatherings. Ultimate frisbee makes reffing decisions by consensus. Everyone has to agree with the reffing decision. Ben looks genuinely annoyed.
As an actual sports. Yeah, that is awful.
Absolutely. Anyway,
where were we?
Oh, so second half of life. The problem is you don't want to become one of those guys. Either side, either the people who start in the second or who stay in the first. But that for me was super helpful because I was getting to the point where, having started off as a fundamentalist, I was like, it's weird. I don't hate John Hick anymore, and I like a philosopher of religion. And I'm not angry about people who are taking a slightly chilled out approach to scripture. Even though I think I was still evangelical enough to believe in the total God-breathedness of scripture, I just wasn't angry with people who didn't. And my lack of anger made me think, shit, am I not a Christian anymore?
Yeah.
Oh, crap. And I was really worried. Big crisis of faith. And then I heard that Richard Raw talk actually at Greenbelt Festival, and I was like, oh my goodness, it's okay. I am a Christian. My faith is just evolving into a different kind of phase or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was really, really helpful to me.
Yes. And Falling Upwards is probably the Richard Raw book to read if you want to go a little further into that.
Yeah.
These were absolutely magnificent questions from Robert.
Yes.
I think we should buy Robert a beer.
We should buy Robert a beer.
Robert, it looks like you're on PayPal based on the app here. But it's in euro. How many of our glorious Queen's British sterling pounds?
Okay, so I have bought beers in Belgium, and they are not cheap.
He's from the Netherlands.
He's from the Netherlands, but
they look like they use the euros there.
They do the euros there. I think a beer could probably be bought there for €5.
€5. How many? I presume that's just half of one of our pounds, is it? Or
let's go.
Oh wait, the app will tell us.
They got it in euros.
Oh wow! Let's just go £5 of our pounds.
Yeah.
And
It's €5.63. So Robert, because your questions are so good, we're buying you a beer.
That'll be.
Imagine if that's not him.
Some random
This
dude.
may not be you, but
Okay, if it's not him,
Also, you're
then
the
somebody
guy
else
through the,
called Robert Hoening, somebody else who's called Wait, Laura. Somebody else called Robert Hoening is about to get £5, and then he's going to get arrested for like money laundering, drug trafficking,
that is
terrorism.
going. Gone. You have sent €5.63 to Robert Hoening.
The real Robert has just received €5.63 from an absolute stranger.
Yeah. He has, because he hasn't listened
He has
to
no idea.
he hasn't listened to
This
the
is
podcast
yet.
So, Robert, if you were wondering about that money,
before you reject that money, just listen to the podcast.
we really wanted to buy you a beer. So now you've got that beer, and one of the beers that you could drink, because he suggested a whole bunch. So he said,
lots of beers.
You have to try some Dutch or Belgian beers. Dutch or... Is there a difference? No, I'm joking. Leffe, Choufe, Affliege.
Corny, isn't that an ice cream?
Yeah, I thought so. Boodles and Boodles Light. La Trappe.
Sounds like a
Texels. It's a La Trappe. And beers from the 21st Century Monastery, Kleiberg, which just sounds awesome anyway.
Yeah.
21st Century Monastery in Amsterdam. You know what?
None of the neo-monastics I know are brewing.
No. Well, actually, in America, you know they are. You know Shane Claiborne is.
Oh, yeah.
If we are ever in Amsterdam, which some of us will be, I'm sure, we need to meet up with Robert and have a beer and maybe record a special Dutch Blitz version of Beer Christianity. Okay, there was another question. It was a kind of supplementary question that you alluded to, and that question was, I'm struggling with this. How do I keep in touch with people who still believe the Bible as the full Word of God and as the true history of the world, when you yourself learn that a lot of things, events, and people mentioned in the Bible are myths or have at least not happened the way they're reported? And Robert talks about Genesis 1-3 or Moses in the desert. How do you learn? And this is a much more important question. So first of all, how do you deal with that? Like when people are talking about that, and with people who don't have the same kind of approach to Christianity and especially the scriptures you do. And then his second question is, how do you learn not always to get into a discussion about that?
Yeah.
Which is maybe, I think the second question may be the most profound question for our age. In these polarized times, like what you don't want to be is a centrist dickhead who says that the important thing is that we just don't disagree, about anything, or we don't pick a side. But how do you not keep on getting into the same conversation again and again and again with people, which is really not helpful and not edifying and all that kind of stuff? Like, what do you guys think? Like people who you disagree with ending up only ever talking about the things you disagree on. Because I think there's a thing about not being one of the people who says don't pick a side. The important thing is that we're not polarized anymore. I think it's really fine to be polarized if you're talking about apartheid. I think it's really fine to be polarized if you're talking about whether Palestinians deserve human rights or any of that sort of stuff. But there's a lot of stuff that maybe it doesn't have to, and there's a lot of stuff that we could be agreeing on that we're just not. Like, I find myself getting into political conversations with people who literally only disagree about the Labour leadership, and all we're talking about is the Labour leadership and whether we want to go centrist or left wing. We could probably be spending our time, and this is my fault, as much as anyone, and by that I mean probably more than anyone. How do you get away from that?
So I think a couple of things, specifically when talking about people who, and it sounds like you refer in the question to people who still take a literal translation of say Genesis 1-3. How do I keep in touch with these people? I don't know. How do you keep in touch with anyone?
You're the wrong person to talk about this. Gives one-word answers on WhatsApp. It's no good.
But how do you stop keeping in arguments with them? Well, it's not always your job to correct them to the truth, the so-called truth that you discovered in the last 12 months. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That is
because in 2 years' time, you're going to look back at you and think of you as one of them.
Yeah.
And so I guess if you can have that kind of slightly modernist perspective of, from the that what is it called, historicity? That's the key of modernism, right?
Yeah.
It was the first time when people started thinking of themselves from the perspective how the future would look at them. So everybody wanted to kind of get this myth of progress thing going and get as far ahead as possible, so that they weren't looking as laughable as everybody else. Like, it's a useful perspective to have.
Yeah.
I myself don't have any problem with hanging out with and talking to right-wingers particularly on this stuff, because I'm like, I don't know, man, you may be right.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I have as little faith in the kind of really literalist approach to some books in the Bible as I do to historiography and history and archaeology and the sciences, because I believe in the Thomas Kuhn thing of paradigm shifts within science. Like, everything that we think of as almost given now will be overturned by a new system.
Yeah.
So any intellectual arrogance in any kind of science, particularly the human sciences, which are, as Foucault says, like, it's right up brought in Foucault lore just for you first time in the new year, are manufacturing rather than discovering knowledge. Like, I'm not sure that we need to be too stressed out about that, because they may not be as wrong as we think they are.
Absolutely, yeah.
Even if the conclusions that they draw from those starting points may be bad. Or I think it could always be a shift of emphasis of like, okay, but if it is true, what now?
Yeah. When you look in those scriptures at Christ, whenever people tried to, and numerous times, particularly the Pharisees, drawing a line in the sand, standing on one side and trying to split the thing, the response was usually to subvert the paradigm and subvert the question, and do it with absolute assertion and confidence in what he's saying, but with a level of humility as well, which I think can be learned from.
Yeah. What about you, Laura? When you got the people who, are super right wing about this stuff, how do you deal?
I'm thinking. I did write down some answers. Like, I don't know if this is directly in response to. Yeah, I just kind of wrote down some thoughts about stuff like. This in no way answers your question, but like, for me personally, I do think it is important to talk about like stuff like that, and I think it's important to listen to each other and stuff like that. I mean, you're talking about how to not do that, so I feel like
this is a different approach.
But I mean, like I think it is important that we do talk about that, because like I feel like I don't have an opinion on like that kind of stuff just because I haven't had the chance to think about it. I have never been given the opportunity to form an opinion on it, because like you're taught it in church when you're very young, and then like no one ever touches it again, because it's like, oh, we don't want to
really
get into this, like we don't want to start this argument. So like
it's exactly trying to avoid the argument.
I mean, I imagine it's different in a theological college, but like, I think like for the non-theologians, well, that's an argument we're not really into. It is important to kind of talk about that and be able to do it in an environment of like, okay, like this is what I think about it, and I'll listen to what you think about it. Just because I'm listening to you and respecting your view doesn't mean that I'm going to be converted to it, but I still think it's important that we like share it, because like the scripture is it is a text, which means that it can be interpreted in a number of ways. So like we're going to have different opinions. So like we're going to have different opinions on it. We may as well hear them.
But I think what he's talking about is people who don't see it as a text, who see it as a single monolithic. It's that mindset that says, well, you've got your instruction book for life because it's the Bible. It's kind of like, I've never found it that clear, and I don't think it's actually contradictory. I think that there are competing voices there. But that kind of reading, for me, when I was younger, I would have found that horrifically liberal and basically, well then, so you don't care about truth, And I think it's how do you deal with people who don't even see it as a text that is open to interpretation?
And like I think you kind of see this a lot in like social media and stuff like that, of like people are constantly being barraged by opinions that they don't agree with, and like, you know, you see it with a lot of like kind of influencers and stuff like that, like constantly being barraged with like hate and trolling and stuff like that, which is like something you're not ever going to want to see. And like the bottom line is, you are going to eventually have to remove yourself from that situation. If there's nothing that you can do to convince the other person to stop, then your last option is to remove yourself. And like that is,
I was blocked on Twitter just tonight before I came out. Wow. Hey, cheers to that.
Cheers to that. Hey, they're lost.
yeah.
It really is.
And like, you know, but doing that isn't necessarily conceding defeat. I think that's very. I think that's a very important thing for some people to understand. Is like, removing yourself from a discussion does not mean that one person has won. It means that I don't want to have this discussion anymore, and like, because what we are doing is not productive.
That's interesting, because I definitely read my blocking as that I had won.
Yeah, you know, sometimes like, you know, in that, but like, I see it.
I'm just saying, I was just like, well. No, absolutely. And especially, like, I think sometimes you got to do it for your mental health.
Yeah.
And there have been a number of discussions that I've been involved in where I've just been like, I can't do this anymore because it's making me anxious, it's making me sad. And I think that's the point where maybe it's the not having the conversation at that point, because if it's in real life and you run into this person again, especially if you're in a theological context of like, I think it's always helpful to remember that this is not the norm, that in any kind of rarefied situation where you're disagreeing with another Christian on some, you know, point of theology or interpretation or whatever, you got to keep in mind there's a wide world out there that thinks we're both talking to our fucking imaginary friend, you know, and that thinks that we are both responsible currently for, you know, the Inquisition, or, you know, that there's very little difference between us and the Ku Klux Klan, or, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, actually, and that's not to say find a common enemy and then you can really, you know, bond together.
It's
but
more like you could be doing something slightly more productive with your time.
this is how I find when I argue with leftists online, is eventually I feel convicted by the spirit of like, you know, this isn't the enemy, right?
Yeah.
You know, weirdly, the conversation that I had with this person on Twitter was some person who had followed me had then retweeted this thing, and it was a massive thing on abortion, but it was just a very extreme pro-life thing. And I usually don't get involved in that conversation because I think it is very nuanced. It is one of those conversations that becomes quite unproductive quite quickly. But I just found the tone of it so annoying that I kind of tweeted this person who it was like Red Pill Ministries or something. It was something like really like, oh, come on, dude. And I asked them about, I said, interesting, I'll take a look. It seems a little bit extreme. They're like, no, they definitely want, I don't want to get into the abortion thing on this podcast. We can do it one day, but we argued, and I was like, okay, so you're pro-life, yeah. And I was like, out of interest, because they were North American, how did you feel about the Iran assassination? And we got into this long conversation actually about that, and about whether it's okay to kill your enemies and whether it's okay. And their take was, well, I'm not pro-life for terrorists, but babies are completely innocent. And I was like, okay, well then let's leave the babies out of it. Talk to me about him being a terrorist. Talk to me about why it's okay to kill him and not okay to kill an American general who's visiting Mexico, or any of that sort of stuff. And I just found the Iran assassination to be a really horrific start to this year, just in terms of of where we're going as a world. And I was wondering what you guys thought of it and like what your reaction was when you saw the news.
I might be wrong, but I kind of assume that most people in our generation, and it probably differs a little bit from our parents' generation, because we're kind of two generations removed from World War II, as opposed to our parents who are one generation removed. And you know the classic Mitchell and Webb, "Are we the bad guys?" Like that, I think, and most our peers, that's the default reaction. Even more so with the current leadership that we have here and in the US as well. Like the assumption that we're the good guys is just not there. It's certainly not there for me. And like you, I was deeply disturbed by it, and I mean, wow, we can go into a whole different number of routes from this. I think back to the Shane Claiborne episode of this podcast. If you haven't listened to that, please do, because it's probably one of the very best interviews we've got on here, amongst a number of great interviews that we have on here.
The hell, man.
But and his line saying about even. Was it him who described kind of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his attempt or his plans to kill Hitler?
Being a failure.
Viewed that as a failure and a sin, and even sort of asked forgiveness in advance and say, "I know what I'm doing is not right."
Yeah.
Wow, that.
Yeah.
Like I don't. Regardless of what you think about the assassination itself and like should we kill our enemies, which I personally don't believe we should. Like, that's just my opinion. But like the thing of the whole debacle that struck me the most was that plane that got shot down, and there was not a lot of. There was a civilian plane that was flying to Canada, and it was shot down by I think it has been converted as an Iranian missile. And it was a few days after that, and I was like, and there was not as much coverage on that than there was about the rest of it, but I think it's important for everyone to realise that this is what happens in war. Like, it's not like some glorified thing, it is innocent people accidentally being killed, and that is the majority of war, and I think that is the most important thing that people should be seeing right now, and like saying, and like it's awful, like that. Obviously, it's awful that they had to be shot down, but I hope people are able to see that and be like, maybe this is a bad thing that we'd be doing. Let's maybe quit while we're ahead. But I mean, I don't necessarily think we're gonna go into a full-blown World War III.
You know what? Before this year, I would have thought that the best thing about Trump is that he has de-escalated global conflict.
Absolutely, yeah. Compared to Obama, who just
accelerated the assassination program. The president
drone program.
Yeah, it was interesting. This person who I'd been arguing with on Twitter was like, well, I don't see any tweets from you condemning Obama. And I was just like, well, then you haven't looked, because I wrote several opinion pieces condemning Obama and the US and the UK about this. Also a feature in Christianity magazine. Maybe you should check it out. Maybe that was when they blocked me. And I think the fact that he did that around the time of his impeachment is some really obvious timing. But nonetheless horrifying. And to be honest, part of it, I think we were all just like, holy shit, we're going to go into World War III. We're all going to die because nuclear powers get involved. And let's be clear, like, Russia will side with Iran. Russia has enough nukes to kill everybody, just like the States does. And you've got some fairly, volatile players happening, or involved, like Israel, who you just don't know what they're going to do. Like they've got some crazy people in their, oppositions, never mind anything, pushing them ever further to the right. But beyond that, beyond the kind of because there was this universal liberal consensus that was like, look, obviously it's fine to kill him, but we just need to be careful because this could lead to World War III. And I'm like, it is not okay to kill him. They called him a terrorist. Now, how is a
Under
general
what definition?
a is anyone who opposes the might of the American empire a terrorist? He's taken American lives. I'm like, how the fuck has he taken American lives if they're not in the Middle East illegally? What I found really interesting was the Iraqi government asking America to leave. I have yet to see all those troops withdrawn, hey? It's almost as if America doesn't care what you think. They're going to put their troops wherever they want. And if you've ever seen a map, look up a map of Iran and American bases in the area. The aggressor here is not Iran. And you need to look at the history. You need to remember the passenger airplane that was shot down by the United States, an Iranian passenger airplane, and the American military who ordered that attack got medals, not fired. You need to remember that Iran voted really fought hard to get a democratically elected government so that their despotic ruler, the Shah, would not be in charge. And because it threatened British petroleum interests, he was overthrown and the Shah was put back in place. And that is what led directly to the Iranian Revolution, to the Ayatollah taking control, and to those really iconic, although you never see pictures of them now, images of Iranian protesters approaching the Shah's military forces, Western-backed military forces, and putting flowers in the barrels of their guns. That's how the current regime got in. We talk a lot about them being evil and awful because we like to other any enemy of the state. And for me as a Christian, the main thing is to remember that if the enemies of God appear to also be the enemies of your country's financial and military interests, then maybe you're being lied to, because that's terribly convenient. I just found that concerning. That's a thing.
I do think that one of the most wonderful things to come out of all this is all of the memes that have appeared. They've been so
It's totally worth it.
It's so funny. Like all of my favourite ones have been like the ones of like, we've been fighting for women equality for too long. No. We belong in the kitchen. We don't want to be drafted. Like no. Like all of the ones like.
The draft memes have been
the
rough.
draft memes are so fucking funny. Like, and there's ones that are like, all the like women. They're going to be drafted. Me, the 1950s, like
holding the tray, hair in curlers.
Yeah, that's funny.
Actually, while we're on the topic of kind of major world events and the Christian response, I thought it would be amiss of us not to talk really about the Christian response to the Duke of Sussex and the Duchess of Sussex.
Very important things.
Highly important.
It's really like Prince Harry and Princess Meghan. Is that what she's called? The Duchess of Sussex. They've stepped down from royal duties, and gosh, I don't know what we're going to do without them. They're so important to our national life, as are all the royals who are adding so much by just sitting around. Like, wealth is not going to sit around and be had by other people, So.
But a classic example of removing yourself from the conversation of like, Harry and Meghan were having to deal with a load of shit, and they were like, you know what?
They're still going to be drawing some cash, though, I think.
I know.
So they're not escaping the guillotine when it comes. I think that's the important thing.
So to go back to how we started this pod, if we have to sum up the progressive Christian response in 3 words, as the master of 3 words, because we failed it.
Progressive Christian response
to this situation.
To this really significant... Megxit. I'm sorry, that's amazing. I didn't even hear that.
Yeah, that was the sun. It could only be the sun.
We don't care.
Amen to that. And I need another drink because I can't.
All right, we're going to get another drink. Okay, so we're back with these beers. Thank you very much. Thanks,
Drabs.
No, man. Thanks, Drabs, for buying the beers. Yes, sorry. And the Jack and Coke. Fiercely independent, forever craft. It's a terrible. That's the title.
That's almost as bad as.
That's Brewdog. Brewdog were never a craft brewery. They were like a real ale brewery, or were they a craft brewery?
I don't know, but if you say it backwards, it's God Werb, which sounds a bit like God's word, so it seems appropriate to me.
That is terrible. That is all kinds of terrible. And as is, no, this is good. Laura came up with a great title for this episode.
New beer, new me.
New beer, new me. It's a beautiful thing.
Happy New Year!
Happy New Beer. Okay, so that's basically it for this episode of Beer Christianity. Thanks so much for listening. We're going to be coming back in the new year with a whole bunch of new stuff. There are at least 3 people who I've said I want to do interviews with and who have said, yeah, sure, that's fine.
We haven't done shout-outs.
We haven't done our shout-outs, that's true. Thank you to the people who've been texting and writing in and all that kind of stuff. So we did mention Raquelita. I also want to mention Andy Key, who is always so ridiculously supportive of us on Twitter. So Andy, thanks so much for your support and your encouragement and just for being a politically sound and very good egg who also has good taste in music. He just bought the just talking about personal stuff from his Twitter stuff. Just what he's been doing.
I've not stalked his Twitter
I just been stalking Andy, and he likes Bad Religion, and they're freaking awesome. So yeah, that is it from him. So you've got one, Laura, from Hannah McBabs.
Hannah McBabs, she dropped me a lovely message over the Christmas period saying that I, in my words of wisdom, had inspired her to watch the A Christmas Prince trilogy on Netflix, which I think everyone should follow her lead and do that, because they are masterpieces. I haven't watched the third one yet, but I did watch A Night Before Christmas, and let me tell you, it is hot garbage, but it's also beautifully done. So that is, it's excellent. If you want to know how to become a true knight, then that's your film.
Good, I'll keep that in mind. And Hannah also said some very nice things about the podcast because she is a babe.
Absolute edge.
Drabs, did you have somebody you were going to give a shout out to?
No, I already bought Robert a beer. That's my generosity and grace for the listeners done for the night. But I would like to say to the rest of you, Happy New Year. I hope you have an awesome 2020. Go ahead and send and fulfill those resolutions and faith goals and whatever else. And whatever else you do this year, subscribe to Beer Christianity, because we just love to have you on the journey for 2020.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for listening. You can catch us at beerchristianity.libsyn.com. I'm thinking of putting together an actual website and actually, letting us blog there a little bit and kind of having people get into it. You can also find us on Instagram, on YouTube, on Stitcher, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and just, also in Didcot in one of the bars. These are the places you can find us. So do get in touch with us in one of the only 2 bars in Didcot. Thank you for listening, and we're going to do one final thing, which is we wanted to pray a blessing on each pub that we record this in, and Drabs is rolling his eyes like an absolute bitch, but I think it's a really good thing to do.
Yeah, it probably means it's me that has to say the prayer as well.
You have to say the prayer. He who rolls his eyes has to pray for the pub. That's how we go. So we're going to
his first eyes,
as the Lord said. So we're going to pray for Barrow Lounge in Didcot.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you for this place, the chance to be here, enjoy some beer and recording this podcast. And we want to pray for this place. We want to pray that everyone who comes in here just receives a welcome. We want to pray that by some unexpected way that your Spirit will be present here, and those that enter the doors here, particularly those who are broken and hurting and vulnerable and weak, would somehow encounter you and your Spirit's here. We pray for the staff here, pray your blessing upon them in all that they do, and pray that your love and hope would fill their lives as well. So God bless this place, and thank you for letting us be here tonight. Amen.
Amen. Thanks for listening.
Bye.